Hello, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. My name is Simon Romero, and I'm a national correspondent with the New York Times. This is a fascinating panel that we have ahead of us right now in discussing Indo-Hispanos and Genízaros in the what is now the American Southwest. I came to know about Genízaros as a journalist, and also as someone who grew up who was born and raised in northern New Mexico in a little place called Rivera. I spent most of my career overseas in Latin America, and when I came back to the United States, I'm based in Albuquerque. I got the chance to write about Genízaros, and it was just something that opened a whole new world to me about the history of this region, of the peoples of our region, and also of my own family history as well. And so it is with great pleasure that I'm going to be introducing our panelists today. They are starting off with Dr. Ana Malinalli X Gutiérrez Sisneros, who is she is an associate professor of nursing at Northern New Mexico College in Española, New Mexico. She is an advanced practice adult psychiatric and mental health clinical nurse specialist, and she traces her ancestors in New Mexico back to 1603 and indigenous Genízaro roots beyond that, of course. For 38 years, she has partnered with rural towns such as Española, Embudo, Velarde, Las Vegas, Chimayo, Taos, and with other local agencies such as Tewa Women United to provide culturally relevant behavioral health services using the ancient knowledge of curanderismo and her dual master's degrees in Latin American studies and psychiatric nursing. We also have with us Isabel Trujillo, who has a long history in Abiquiú on her maternal side from the early 1800s. She married Virgil Trujillo in 1983, and they have a son, Ventura, with 3 boys and a girl on the way, and 2 daughters, Delilah and Chavela. She has been a grant writer and director for El Pueblo de Aveshu Library and Cultural Center for around 20 years. And her intergenerational projects have resulted in local collections with oral histories that in turn serve to give visual presentations for others around the world to understand about the Genízaro people and the history of Abiquiú. Finally, we also have Dr. Patricia Trujillo, who is the Deputy Cabinet Secretary for the New Mexico Department of Higher Education. Prior to her appointment, she earned tenure in English and Chicano Studies and served as the founding director of the Office of Equity and Diversity at Northern New Mexico College, where she oversaw programming to address access and inclusion for historically underserved populations in higher education. Patricia was born and raised in the Española Valley in northern New Mexico and has dedicated her career to improving social engagement via critical education, social justice, and community-based participatory methods. And with those brief intros in mind, I'm going to hand off the discussion now to Patricia to get us going.
Good evening. Sengimu, buenos días, buenos tardes, le de Dios, depending on when you all watch this. It's such a pleasure to be on this panel here with my comadres, with my colleagues, to talk about Genízaro identity, and specifically putting that emphasis on the A, and really talking about what it means to claim that term in 2021. So a lot of the conversation that we're going to be having today has to do with not necessarily the preservation or the history, right? Like we will say things that are historical, but really the maintenance. What does this look like to still live in Genízaro communities today? So by way of introducing myself, I was mentioned earlier that I was born and raised in the Española Valley. But more precisely, my mom, Milin Trujillo, was born in El Huache, New Mexico, to an ejido, a portion of a land grant on the Okeawinga land grant. And my family has been there for many, many generations. And my dad, El Difunto David Trujillo, was from Upper Ranchitos de Taos. And so in my own studies, my own scholarship that is very much based in New Mexico studies and spatial theory, and also Chicana feminist theory, of course, got interested in doing my genealogies. And for me, the term Genízara is one that I have become intimate with through my studies and through my relationships in living in my community and working in my community. But it was really one of recovery. And so in the photo that you see on the screen, this is actually my great-grandmother and my grandfather, Fred Valdez, and this was the photo that was taken in Aguila, Colorado. And as you'll see in our conversation that when we talk about northern New Mexico, historically that included part of what is now contemporary Colorado that Felipe Gonzalez calls the New Mexico Notch, right? Here on the ground, we often joke that it's La Nacioncita, right? Like that, we're all part of the same people. But in this photo, you'll see that, of course, centered are my grandmother and my grandfather. I'm sorry, I should say my great-grandmother. But in the background, you can see who is a person only identified through family and oral history as the cautiva that lived with this Valdez family. And so for me, these are these areas as a literature, as somebody who's a literary theorist, as somebody who studies literature, who wants to go back and recover these stories. But oftentimes we only have these photos, right? And oftentimes have really inadequate historical documentation to be able to really address the very serious, very complicated histories that they represent. And so for me, how I want to begin this panel is to really talk about the way that Chicanas are writing Genízaras into literary history, right? Because what happens is oftentimes when we try to do the archival, historical, even anthropological work, is that we don't often find ourselves there as women. And I want to quote Laura Sullivan, who helps me to frame this when she says, she's specifically talking about Black feminist history. And she says, there is an unstated presumption that the only reliable information about Black women is that it must be collected by white observers. And so for me, in some of the writing that I'm doing, I really take this concept and center it about an unstated presumption that the only reliable information about Genízaras, right, these captive women of New Mexico history, is that it must be collected by, for the most part, historically male anthropologists. And so today we really want to intervene in that and have more of a conversation about what our daily lives look like as Genízara and Genízaro descended women in our communities who are doing work to continue the preservation, and sometimes that word makes me feel uncomfortable, so I'm going to say the maintenance of culture, understanding that there isn't always like this perfect or pristine authenticity to it, that sometimes we're thinking about, you know, how do we connect to our traditions? How do we sometimes have to go searching for those traditions, but then how are we also called upon to create new traditions? And so I'm really proud to be sitting on this panel with two other women who are doing just that. And before we get to them, I also want to talk about some of the work that I'm doing. I'm putting together a monograph and highlighting the work of 3 different women authors who are writing Genízaras into our literary canon. And so what's interesting about the 3 women who are doing this writing is that in many ways they're taking historical genres and imagining them, because sometimes when we aren't in those historical documents, right? So for a lot of us, as we're doing our genealogies and looking to, you know, old census data, baptismal reports, marriages, a lot of our antepasadas, our grandmothers, aren't there. We literally get to that spot that will literally just say cautiva or India. And so there is this very powerful intervention that Chicana feminist literature is providing, because there's this idea that sometimes you have to create your own history, and that you find some of the most astute fact in the tension or in that interstitial space between fact and fiction. So the book that I would really like to highlight is The Gifted Galvadon Sisters by Lorraine Lopez. Lorraine Lopez is a professor at Vanderbilt University, and she's created a narrative that includes these fictionalized WPA narratives. And if you know anything about New Mexico history, is that some of the earliest documentation of, anthropological sourced stories from northern New Mexico were, and I'm going to use this word purposefully, right, in the context of this greater conversation about cautivas, is that these stories were captured by writers who came in during the Works Progress administration, because it was really considered that our Hispano communities and Native American communities in New Mexico were disappearing. And so, for instance, there is the wonderful collection by Tediana Rebolledo and, I'm not going to forget her first name, but Marquez. It's called La Diabla a Pie, and it's writings from the Works Progress administration. And so it's one of the places where we see early depictions of women's and their contributions to communities, but also to the maintenance of culture. But what Lorraine Lopez does in her book is, in telling the story of Fermina, a Hopi woman who was made captive to the Galvadon family, is she uses the format of WPA, fictionalized WPA narratives, to give a full rendering of Fermina's whole life. And so what this is really addressing is that idea that there is this real sense of cultural desire when you're somebody who is Genízaro or Genízara descended, and you don't have the access to the capital H historical documents to demonstrate who your family is. And so what Lopez has done in this novel is reworked that through fiction, obviously doing a lot of historical research in the process, to talk and to speak to the gifts that Fermina leaves her granddaughters, who are actually, she lives in the house of her granddaughters, and nobody, the history of Fermina being their maternal great-grandmother has been kept from them. And so, as you can imagine, this novel does a great job of really allowing us to think about like that piece of not knowing and then knowing, and what does that mean to like the radical healing of our communities. Because oftentimes, as young people, we don't understand the tensions that Indian slavery has brought into our households. And very often it is like this known unknown. And so as we come into consciousness, and for me, what that really meant was through Chicano studies, through learning, through academia, is it gave me pathways to be able to go and ask and have conversations with members of my own family, who then were able to share these more difficult histories that are a part of our lineages. And so I have a little bit of time left to introduce to two other novels. And significantly, I want to point out that these are both young adult fiction, and they're very rarely considered as part of the canon of understanding Genízaro identity. And one is a mass market book created by the American Girl Doll Company, but it's called Secret in the Hills, and it's a Josefina mystery. And Josefina Montoya is the American Girl doll that is based in New Mexico history, but significantly, the work in the Josefina doll actually represents the highest, or the best, or how shall I say this, the most well-funded archival endeavor probably in New Mexico history. The company spent, well over $250,000 just researching not only the doll, but also the text that surrounded her. And so in this text, there is a native cautiva, and then there is a Mexican cautiva, and one is a girl and one is an elder. And when they meet each other, there, of course, because it's American Girl, there's this resolution that is very neatly tied in a bow where they're able to help each other heal. But it does create this interesting perspective of telling Genízara history from a 9-year-old girl's perspective. And so for me, one of the things that this novel does, and that we have to take seriously, is that it is a tool, whether that is curricular or extracurricular, that we can use with children to be able to have these deeper conversations about what these stories mean to our heritage. And then lastly, we have Milagro of the Spanish Bean Pot by Emerita Romero Anderson. And this one is interesting because it's a historical novel set in the late 1790s. And so what is interesting about this one is that it's about the transition or the acquisition of traditional knowledge and how it's shared between Hispano family and a cautiva who is a Dine. And so again, just with these three novels, there's this really interesting juxtaposition of where in a lot of the Genízaro research, there's very little representation of women. All of a sudden, we have three novels where we can introduce and have a much more dynamic conversation. And so I'll stop there because we have two other women who have very interesting things to share about this, and we can come back. But the one thing that I see that is powerful about having these texts and the work that we're doing is that Isabel and I were just talking about starting a youth reading group and how we could use these texts to help especially the young women of the Pueblo of Abiquiú start to understand and perhaps gain more interest in learning the history of their pueblo. And so thank you so much, and I will pass it on to my colleague.
Can I ask you, Comadre, about that picture that you have up on the screen of that? Who's that lady in the door behind that screen door?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. So this is one of those pictures where, unfortunately, I don't know her name, but in oral history that was shared with family that we recently got into contact with, thanks to Ancestry.com, this was a photo that was shared with us. Mostly because my grandfather passed away at a very young age. My mom was only 4 when he passed away. So the oral history, again, was shared with us is that the woman in the doorway was a cautiva in the household, but nobody remembered her name. Is there a child or two? Yeah.
There's a child or two. Very poignant picture. Thank you. I want to be talking about a research study that I did. I chose to do in the Pueblo of Abiquiú, and I'm a descendant of Genízaros too. And I really like that picture because I don't have any pictures of my grandmothers. Genízaro grandmothers. One of them was Nana Ia, what's her name? From Casa Colorada, and I called my cousin Francisco yesterday to get a story about her to tell you today, and he passed away. He's passed away on May 1st. So, but a book of his came out. Thank you. A book of his came out, Stories of Childhood in Navo. And I'm gonna get that book. I already read it from his wife yesterday. Another grandma San Juana, was a Navajosa. What's the word they used? Chavez, adoptada, and she was purchased by Pakistan. Our Tata Serafin Perea in Torreon. That's a very interesting story, and she was known as a healer in the mountains, the Manzano Mountains. And one of our cousins has a star chart that she used and a healing stone of hers too. I've never seen them, but I've just heard. My paternal grandfather, Vicente Gutiérrez, he was from Mexico, and he's adoptado also into Tecolote, and then went to San Acacio. These are other Genízaro villages that I'm mentioning: Tecolote, Jarales, Tomé. So this picture here you see is my grandpa, Apaito, we called him. I don't know him, but I hear of him. Mauricio Sisneros from San Acacio, and he was said to be Apache. He was a huesero, a chiropractor today, I guess. So that's my father's grandfather. And the next slide is my paternal great-grandfather. We called him Manito. Not grandpa, Manito, Juan Serna, born in Tomé. Another, like I said, another Genízaro village, Tomé. And he was, I don't know the DNA of my relatives. I don't have their, percentage of native blood that they have, but I found a story about the Sernas, and it says, entre mis investigaciones sobre la historia de la familia Serna, varios informantes me platicaron que los ancianos decían que estos hombres Sernas eran muy trigueños y indiados en su parecimiento, que tenía mucha sangre de mezcalero apache. So he was born in Tomé, which is close to Tewa lands, right? To Islera Pueblo. So I don't know if he was Tewa or, but look, you can see look at his facciones, look at his face. You can see the native in him, and he was my mother's favorite grandpa. So my dissertation was called Ethnic Identity as a Mediator of Mental Health in New Mexico's Genízaro population at the Pueblo of Abiquiú, 1930 to 2017. I started with 1930 because that's the year of my father's birth. And I wanted to go to 2012. That was when he passed away, but it took me 5 more years, Isabel, than that to finish. So I studied 24 people. I interviewed them, qualitative interviews. 12 were female, 12 were male. The ages were 18 to 84. and the results were presented to the land grant on November 14th, 2017, and then to the community on 11/25/17. Other events I got to participate in the land grant meetings, the Georgia O'Keeffe Descent meeting, Fiesta Symposiums, Water Blessings at Abiquiú in 2019. With we traveled to the confluence of the Chama and Rio Grande rivers and got water there for blessing our homes and our land, our people. And then in 2020, I went to a federal recognition meeting with guest Gilbert Sanchez from San Ildefonso. And this year, July 24th, no, Isabel, we just had another water blessing and danza and lunch honoring the Sain, the Tewa grandmothers and Indita dancers. And that went real well, would you say?
Very well.
Yeah, we had a great meal. Thank you for that great meal. She made the great meal for all of us. We had a beautiful, I hope you show pictures of that in your presentation, Isabel. But right here, I want to honor Isabel for her work. Without her, I couldn't have done this dissertation, and I wouldn't be a DRA now, doctora. She's helped with 5 dissertations that she knows of, she remembers, 2 theses, 7 books, archaeological digs and facilitation, 4 of those, Genízaro symposiums, 5, plus other studies. So I really honor you today, Isabel, for your work. And
Thank you, Anna.
yeah,
Thank you, Patricia.
we're blessed to have you, and you help a lot of people. So here in this next 10 minutes, I want to talk with Isabel about work we've done together at the Pueblo de Aveshu. And in January 2016, they invited me to go with them to the GAN gathering in Denver, Colorado. I thank you for inviting me to that too, Isabel. The Genízaro affiliated nations. And we had a meeting there. And one thing I remember from that meeting is that one of the scholars said that what a Genízaro is a warrior who survived the alchemy of erasure. And I put that in my dissertation. That's one line that he said that I thought was very important. Then after that, we submitted a grant to CONALMA. Do you want to talk about that, Isabel? About the CONALMA grant for the herbal literacy? And you see the calendar behind you in the camera? That orange? There it is. There's our calendar we made. Go ahead, Isabel, talk about that.
So the calendar was kind of the end of the year project so that the participants could take home with them for the next year, the following year. The CONALMA Foundation grant helped to fund ongoing workshops each month. And so we had different presenters every month and invited the community, the public, and the neighboring libraries. In each workshop, we harvested, we talked about a specific herb native to the area, like ocha. Then we did things like fermented foods, bee balm, wako, right? Each month. And so that was prior to developing seed library, which is in the hope for the near future, and also botanica with bottles in the library of certain herbs that get picked along the ongoing months with regular participants. And that the idea for that is so that people could come into the library, investigate, continue to research native herbs in the area, maybe participate in herbal walks, and even in making the tinctures, the cough drops, whatever it is that is needed. But the supply always being within the library in the middle of the pueblo in the bottles, taken care of by, volunteers that have this interest. And so that we could also teach about, addressing our own needs and paying attention to our own body and giving some thought to what can be naturally done before going to the doctor, especially in the way of prevention.
So our objective was to improve the health status and the right to health of diverse communities, ¿verdad?
Yes.
And I kind of got this idea for a botica like this because when I went to do an interview with somebody, I went into her kitchen, and her cabinets were full of jars of herbs on top. And I thought to myself, look at this, what she has.
Beautiful.
Look at what she has here. So because of that, we started this botica, herbal literacy amongst Genízaro descendants, we call it. And the beautiful calendar, because Isabel put on each month, what you're supposed to pick this month, and pick this month, so people will recall and remember, so you just have to turn the calendar. People are still asking you for that calendar, huh?
Right, yes.
And it was a 2020 calendar, so Of course, we haven't done it now because we've been off for a whole year, but that idea and those herbs on that lady's kitchen, she's a nurse also. I got to get her, Isabel, and I together and do another, not a grant, but a submission of an abstract to the American Holistic Nurses Association. So they accepted our abstract to present our work, but it was canceled due to COVID-19, so we didn't get to go, but it was a lot of work preparing it, and we were prepared to present it. So I wanted to give thanks to Isabel Trujillo and Lynn Hopkins, RN, and myself. I'm not giving thanks to myself, but I was one of the presenters, what I'm saying. And maybe we can do it again another time, but we're going to start we're going to plant a herbal garden there at our farm at the college, at Northern Mexico College, where I work. So maybe you want to get involved in that too. And I wanted to pass out, I think the part we're missing is giving out the herbs to the people, in some maybe little packets. I showed you the one they're doing at Barrios Unidos. They're giving out, health packets of herbal remedies. So we'd like to work on that.
We did also plant in the fenced garden area in the library. We planted some herbs, right?
Yeah, we went to go shopping in Santa Fe at the New Mexico.
I think we have an elderberry bush, right?
How's it doing?
Good, very good. We have echinacea growing. What else? Yeah, yarrow. Lots of herbs in the library fenced garden area.
Yeah. So I was there last Saturday and I forgot to go check on the herbs. Thank you for taking care of that little garden we planted.
They can be picked fresh.
Yes. And hibiscus we planted. Did we get the hibiscus growing? Yeah. So of all the herbs, in part of my dissertation, I asked people about traditional medicine. Do they use it? And what do they use? And, how did they learn about it? And the one out of the 24, people that I interviewed, the herb that was the most popular was Osha.
Right.
So, we all know, maybe some people listening don't know what Osha is.
To the area.
Yeah. But it's a good medicine for respiratory illness. And it keeps snakes away. Keep in your pocket when you're hiking. And it's good for cough, sore throat.
Infection.
It's such a good herb. You use it. You have a piece of it here, right?
Yeah.
So we have a piece of it here in this basket. So the next thing we have done together is work on a panel for the Smithsonian Institute. Then that's the next thing we've been doing, right? So we've been meeting on that, and we did a Zoom meeting with all the panel members in June, and then we did the last thing we did was last Saturday, the Tewa Sayin blessing. Sayin means grandmothers of the waters. We went up to the mountains. What is that place we went to? Under land grant, the number 7. What do you call it?
Well, it's where the cold spring meets the hot spring, and they come down to provide water for the community as a warm spring. And so during the winter, when everything is frozen and ice is everywhere, the stream still runs beautifully. But it does get chlorinated at a tank before reaching the pueblo in order to access funding for the Water Association.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place. The two rivers meet, the confluence. Mm-hmm. And then the Tewa grandmothers asked you to say the name of the rivers, the streams in Spanish. And what were the names?
Sequía del Pueblo.
That's the cold one.
And then La Agüita Calientita.
It comes out of the earth, huh? Mm-hmm. Oh, it's a beautiful place. And we happened to see people camping there. I had never seen that before. And I was, impressed to see people were camping.
It's in the land grant.
I know, that's their land. Right. That land is what keeps the Genízaros of Abiquiú grounded to who they are, sure, where they're from. Would you say?
Yes, of course.
Without
the land, you're lost until you find a base and settle down, and then take care of it and pass it on.
So I was telling the elders there that day that los días antes, when they had the fiestas of Santo Tomás, the people, natives would come from all over to stay there at Abiquiú, for a few days, to enjoy the fiestas. And where would they camp at?
Well, there's teepee rings nearby in the mesas for the times when the Jicaria would come down and would receive rations there at a Gonzalez Bodie store. And then, there's still visiting dancers to feast days from neighboring pueblos. Like San Juan has always kept that tradition to come and dance.
Yes, we had a lot of Tewa people there Saturday in your pueblo, no? Mm-hmm. And I remember when I said that, the people used to come there and camp there, and then when the medicine woman, Evelyn, she said, I feel the spirits here. They're all colors. They're coming down. She was like, and I could see that in my mind. She was painting us a picture of what was going on. And at that same moment, your grandson came out on a motorcycle, a little dirt bike, and he came into the group. And I thought, look at that. There's the reincarnation of those spirits. And there comes your grandson. I just had to tell you that part because your grandson is a beautiful, young man. And he was on his motorcycle. And I'm sure you're teaching him about the old ways of the Genízaros, aren't you?
As much as we can, yes. We have him where he can at least listen, hear, and see what's going on.
So I was going to mention too in my dissertation that I found out most of the ancestors of these descendants were from the female side, the women's side. They're matrilineal.
Right.
And so do you find that too, that it's matrilineal?
I think so, very much so. Yeah.
So is that the case with your family, your husband's family?
Yes, and my own.
Yeah. Well, we were just talking the other day at the gathering about how so many New Mexican families, like we all have a connection to Abiquiú.
Right. We call it a place of many origins.
Yeah,
because so many people come with their stories. Yeah.
On my Taos side, place of many origins, one of my great grandmothers many times removed was sold through Abiquiú into the Trujillo family in Taos. And had children with obviously one of my maternal ancestors, but then she also was moved and bought into another house. And one time when I was telling the story to my tia, like I had done all this academic research, and she listened to me, and I had PowerPoints and I had all my slides, and my tia was there with her cigarette and was being patient with me, but at the end she was like, "Los Hartes, sí, son primos," right? And so there was that sense of we should just be able to have these conversations because, there I had spent, probably the entire summer in the archive, and my tia could have told me the same story.
I just went to a Hill family reunion, and boy, was it interesting in the house that I had heard of, but never known that we had access because didn't know if it was in the family anymore or not.
Yeah.
And sure enough, it's still in the family, and we got to be inside. After all these years, and meet cousins, reunions are a good thing.
Yeah.
So I'll pass the baton on to you, Isabel, for your plática, whatever you wanted to talk about.
I want to start with the photo of the Abiquiú Library because there's a mural on there that is done by Nate Francis of Hopi, and it talks about the migration paths that his ancestors took, that they took from Abiquiú to First Mesa in Arizona, and then were later returned, thanks to the story by Tessie Naranjo Santa Clara, who states that in approximately 1698, after the Pueblo Revolt, chaos took original Tewa of Abiquiú to First Mesa in Arizona, where there are still descendants today in Polaca. They were accepted at the base in order to protect Genízaros, were fierce warriors. The word Moqui is Spanish for Hopi, and that is considered the oldest part of the Pueblo of Abiquiú, which is just behind this library and cultural center. When you reach Abiquiú, the Pueblo is a lot of times passed by because you're on the highway and you don't know that it's up on the hill to the left. So many people come to visit to see George O'Keeffe and where she lived, which is within the Pueblo, and that's another story, but there's many people who visit Abiquiú on a daily basis, all day long. And so this library and cultural center serves as a place to tell the history from within the community, the native community. And so we've done a DNA project with a genealogy backup support, thanks to Henrietta Martinez Christmas and Miguel Torres, and also Moises Gonzalez. But it can be read about in the New Mexico Genealogist of March 2019, volume 58, number 1. There was relations found to Hopi, and we hope to extend on that information. We have had visits from First Mesa in Arizona, van loads to the Pueblo, pointing out Moki and teaching their youth that it is their place of origin and their ancestry began there. And like I said, they were taken or they left in 1698, but along the way for different reasons, left people in Cochiti, Santo Domingo, all along the way. And then after, with the Reconquest, they were brought back to the Pueblo, to the Moki Hill. And again, people were left along the way, in Jemez especially. But so being in the plazuela on a daily basis, I am in the middle of the land grant at the very heart of the community, between the land grant and the church, and then the school systems around us. So I see elders on a daily basis, and I hear their stories. I hear their cries for what they know to be true from oral history traditions and their families' stories. And I've experienced stories about boarding school records, thanks to Dr. Gregorio Gonzalez, also trade schools, blacksmithing, grinding mills, community wells, all kinds of stories there in the Pueblo. Indian agencies, forts, brigadier general that served, since Spain and Mexico in territorial times. So many stories in the Pueblo of Abiquiú that if you're there to visit George O'Keeffe, you're really going away and missing out by not getting the history. So I try to tell the stories as best I can, but our center has a large digital archive because we ran out of space. And thanks to John Ussery, our collections include interviews of Inditas, naming Helen Lopez, Ophelia Watson, Josie Valdez, and Epifania Jaramillo. Their memories are from the 30s, 40s, 50s of dancing. We also have CDs that contain Leandro Martinez and Natividad, his wife. And these were recorded by Dr. Gilberto Benito Cordova, who also is credited at the Smithsonian for the lowrider exhibit, a permanent exhibit, Dave's Dream. We GPSed the entire old cemetery, so every plot at that cemetery is in our computer lab, and it has connections to where people can add biographies. And the way we do that is that a general obligation bond is funded by the public vote, and that allows us to buy equipment. So what we do with that equipment is we use it to collect information, digital archives, and anything that could be beneficial to showing that Abiquiú has been continuous throughout. And also, to have visuals for people from all over the world that come along the old Spanish Trail, especially, or the Continental Divide. So we have a large image scanner, and if people have already done, some homework prior to coming, we ask them if they'd share that, and it's easy as putting it into the Xerox machine, and it goes into the large drive, a dedicated drive, and then we're able to share that and tie it to anything else we have, but share it with the public that continues to come in. We have 3 virtual tours on our website, which is abiquiupl.org. We've participated in History Pin and migrations, internships with UNM Land Grant Council that include History Pin, migrations. Did I already say that? But also we're involved with the Manitos project now with Dr. Esteban Rael Galvez, and he has told me, it's my understanding, that Abiquiú Library is being duplicated in 10 plus other communities. And by that, I mean that the open doors for visitors will be housed at community centers or libraries that can have their local people develop their own stories and, have digital archives of photos or any type of special collections that are pertinent to that immediate community. So since receiving the Smithsonian invitation, we went out and announced for young girls to join, and that grew with a lot of dedication that really brought me a lot of joy and gratitude. I had been hearing in the recent past that numerous girls had not ever had an opportunity to dance, and the reason for that is because the mayordomos of the parish usually choose two who invite, and they normally only invite 2, maybe 4 girls because of costs, in order to, get them ready with their traje and what they're going to wear. But we let anybody that had local ancestry become involved, and we gave learning sessions and had visitors that came in and talked about the motions and how to keep to the beat of the drum and how to pay attention and listen and not get distracted, and have some pride in what the meaning was for dancing as an Indita of the Pueblo. And so my daughters Delilah and Chabela have danced since they were age 3. And so they took charge and became leaders, along with Epifania Jaramillo and Teresa Jaramillo. Ironed and sewed all the traje that needed to be done. And her sister, playing the drum, allowed the practices and dress rehearsals in her home. They both have recollections of Mana Adela Chavez. Mana Adela took it upon herself to hold ensaye. Ensaye means practice. And she had a place where she called the youth in. She asked nobody for permission, but she taught them the songs and the drums. And as Teresa says, they didn't ask any questions. They were told what to do. And so if there's a lot of the meanings gone, it's because they were obedient. And so there was no questions asked, but that's what it takes for leadership, and in order for it to be long lasting. If Teresa and Epifania are teaching Maria Elena Jaramillo. Maria Elena has also brought her youth. She's got 3 children, and Maria Elena has never stopped dancing, so she brings them to all the practices. And then there's also Paulette Jordan and Lydia Jordan, with Criselda Dominguez, who have always participated in Fiesta and always brought all their children, cousins, grandchildren, everybody they could to be a part of it. And so participation is to give not just time, but also in your talents. Mm-hmm. Debbie Carrillo and her mother, Luisa Evans, and Debbie's daughter, Estrella, have all danced, and so Estrella's waiting to bring her daughter in next. That alone is 4 generations. That counts for a lot. There is a list of the dancers and drummers, but that has not always been the case. This was a recruitment. It has become difficult. People aren't having children anymore, and people are moving away, and so it hasn't been easy to get this tradition going and keep it continual. So what we've done with this Smithsonian project is going to be long lasting. These youth have had a lot of lesson. They've learned to respect their position, and I think that they're connected not only to the beat of the drum, to the earth, but also to their people. And I believe that it will be long lasting. The leaders had the youth first thing sign a commitment for dedication. And this was youth among youth, and the second thing they did was they allowed each team to act in the leadership role. So we had 11 girls dancing, and so they danced in teams, and they gave each team a chance to lead, and that was important, I thought. Our youngest were 5 years old, Nevaeh Virginia Trujillo and Lila Rose Jaramillo, and they endured with gusto. They'll probably always dance. The ribbon shirts were made by Patricia at Native Arts, Patricia Maestas. But these leaders, they decided to use the Smithsonian opportunity in order to investigate and study what they were going to wear. So they chose how they wanted to look after all that research, and they made a lot of what they're wearing. So they're really proud of what they're doing. They will be dancing on Saturday for the Rio Arriba County Fair at 10 o'clock in the morning too. And it gives them, they're not alone. They have a group they belong to, so it gives them a sense of belonging. There's things done that will not be part of the film, like and there's an entrega with incense for the santo and the inditas, and they used to call it empeñaban a las indias. And so they would turn them over, they would release them back to the parents. And then there was celebration with pies and cookies and nuts and drinks, but never a full meal. Then there are, we found that there were words particular to Abiquiú, such as chie, they say, with a fist, with a force, chie. And that is because warriors, Genízaros were known to be fierce warriors. And Senate Memorial 59, with a big thank you to the Honorable Regis Pecos, recognizes Genízaros in New Mexico. We're very thankful and grateful for that. Genízaros had mixed language, which allowed for trade fairs, and they also had trails in place prior to the El Camino Real. And I want to point out too that most women on these lists are also Ayudantes of the Morada, which means that they take charge for planning and preparing and even presenting at feast days. It's traditional for the Pueblo to invite other missions. There are 8 other missions of our parish, and it's also traditional to invite other Pueblos. So there are many ties with Siping, Sapawe, Poshu, and Sama. And so I believe that the blood was they were full blood to begin with, and becoming Hispanic was never by choice. They possibly even fought their own kin. And so the patent on the next page, if you zoom into the patent, you can see that they were noted as converted half-breed Indians of the Pueblo of Abiquiú. And President Taft signed that in 1909. And so if that is not federal, we have not seen anything since, but wonder why Abiquiú was left out of the northern Pueblos with the history that it has. I believe change has to be guided, or else even you can change. And so it's important to become involved and gain a pride and be aware. Thank you.
Thank you so much already for just the fascinating presentations and the volume, just the volumes of information that much of which is new to me as a New Mexican. It's incredible to hear, for example, the significance of Abiquiú and how many people, trace their roots back to Abiquiú. I know that, it was people from Abiquiú, for example, who founded some of the places that, during the colonial period in Southern California as well. Mm-hmm. Ana, I think that we're probably related since your ancestors are from Tomé. My dad's family goes back in that part of New Mexico to, Manzano and Punta de Agua, Tomé, Estancia.
My grandmother was born in Punta de Agua.
Punta de Agua, yeah. We're almost certainly related then. And just one thing that emerged from the discussion so far was the importance of matrilineal descent. And how many Genízaras, came into, all of our families at some point through this, through this practice of captives and this trade in human beings, really, that can really be quite jarring, perhaps today, but was a really common practice centuries ago. And so I guess, really just the first question I have, just to, kind of like start our discussion is about definitions of what it means to be Genízara or Genízaro, especially among descendants today. And I'm just going to throw this question out there for anyone who wants to answer, but what are the kinds of definitions that you've heard from people, either in daily life or from the literature that you've read?
I have one here that I can tell you about. I asked somebody that question. May I use their own words of the Genízaro people? And he said that's a loaded question. When I asked him what is the ethnic identity of the Genízaro mean, he said I think you're going to ask many Genízaros how they define Genízaro, and you're going to have each define it, of course, what it means to them. Because for many years I've been exposed to several definitions of the word Genízaro. And you can go to the dictionary, you can see it's a Turkish soldier, janissary, or you can see words of that nature, but then you can come to a current day, let's say in Abiquiú or some of the recent writings, let's say the last 25 years, maybe a little more than that, and people have currently defined Genízaro as a Hispanicized Indian.
Right. I mean, maybe the definition is evolving also, with new awareness, new scholarship, and also just the efforts to really keep, some of these really treasured practices alive into the 21st century. But Patricia, you mentioned these books that I really, I wasn't aware of, and I mean, such rich histories. I mean, dating back to like the 1690s, for example. What kind of definitions of being Genízaro or Genízaro are coming from what you've come across?
Yeah, and I also just recently got the thrill of my life. I got to teach a New Mexico literature class, and when we look at like New Mexico literature and see where we start seeing cautivos, right, Genízaros, you can really look to two early writings and even not so early writings. So 20th century. Well, the first one is Fabiola Cabeza de Vaca Gilbert. She wrote a cookbook called The Good Life. She was one of the first women to graduate from New Mexico State with a home economics degree. And it was really in alignment with this WPA time period. And in her book, she's a side character. She's not one of the main characters, Doña Senya. But Doña Senya, in many ways, is the character in the book who holds a lot, again, of this matrilineal knowledge. She knows the herbs. She knows where to find different plants. She knows also a lot of the different kind of like annual cycles that people need to maintain, but also like the life cycles, right? What are the rites? When somebody is born or when somebody dies, and so very much represents like that sense of a healer and a knowledge bearer in the community. But again, she was not one of the main characters. And then we also see Fray Angelico Chavez. He writes nonfiction about Genízaro, so he does research, but also in his short stories, very often, again, it's one of these known unknowns where it's not the main driving action of the story, but it is, like the sense, and of course, right now when we're recording a panel, I can't think of the name of the short story, but in particular, there's a short story where a man marries a Genízara, and that brings, and she's beautiful. It's like it has all of these tropes, almost like of the folk tales of like La Llorona that we're familiar with, and her beauty in many ways brings about his demise, right? And so there's like these tensions about how little we know about them as characters, but then also that sense that they're always already there as characters in New Mexico. And so with these more contemporary novels, all of the three novels that I referenced are, 2008 and beyond. And so there's like this sense that there is this recuperation that people are seeing this as a significant and an important part of New Mexico history and the stories that we need to tell. I think I just want to give a shout out to the Fort Garland Museum in Fort Garland, Colorado. Just this week, they opened an exhibition on Indian slavery in Southern Colorado. And so one of the things that's really dynamic about their exhibit is that they have a station where people can stop and share their stories from their families. And so there is this sense that this movement of community archives, so like the Manitos project that Isabel was talking about, and also I fortunately was able to be a part of this scholar group with a history of Colorado, did with their community museums about 5 years ago, where we had these conversations of what does it mean to create these sites like the Abiquiú Library and Cultural Center, like Fort Garland Museum, to take Kit Carson out of the museum as the central figure and the colonizer, and to put the people who are actually living in the communities into the museum space, right, and make it active. And so I'm just really, I was really excited when I saw there was an NPR article that just came out about them and a 16-minute video. So I highly recommend checking out that project as well.
I'd like to say too that before COVID, we were making visits from Genízaro village to Genízaro village. We were meeting and sharing just that question in order so that each community could self-identify, could note the differences maybe and come to some sort of conclusion. That was before COVID, so hopefully we can resume that soon. We were also creating traveling exhibits that would show, the attire worn and explain the different reasons for it.
But if I may go here, and I don't want to make anybody uncomfortable, like an impetus for even recommending or suggesting this panel was also how we find ourselves in the work, right? Like, so there's this sense that there's just this maintenance. This is just, what we do, in our communities. But then also this piece that when we do try to engage in the more academic conversations, and if you see me flipping through my notebook, I know I have the dates written down here someplace, is that, we've also been in workshops where as we start to kind of lay some tracks down for this Genízaro aspect of the work, we have been told by other scholars oh, well, you can't use that word, right? Like that word doesn't exist in the archives, or that word has only been used once in the archives and it was actually in Brazil. And so therefore, you're being historically inaccurate by even engaging in the discourse the way that you are. And so for me, I was told when I was referring to Genízaro literature, I was literally pulled aside and corrected and said, you can't use that word. You need to use the word cautiva. The cautiva is more accurate. And so for me, there's also this sense of what does it mean for Genízaro and descended people or people who identify even as a neologism, right? Reclaiming a word later in history, bringing it back to life to be doing this work. And so for me, when I see the young women dancing and going to their practices and having those conversations where they're talking about their traje, and I want to hear so much more. But then at the same time, it's very contemporary, right? Like they're pulling down videos from YouTube and they want to see themselves on YouTube. And so there's also this sense that, again, really creating new boundaries. I was joking with Ana that in Chicana feminist studies, there's this identity or this concept of being a fronteriza, right? Like being somebody who has a feminist politic from the frontera, and thinking about how Genízaro communities have always been a frontier, right? I was saying, and I say this to honor you, Isabel, that Isabel is a Genízaro fronteriza and if I can use an academic metaphor, is that she is the protector, right? She's the warrior who is protecting the space for all of these academics who want to do this work. And also not just academics, for the community members who want to heal those wounds that we have inherited, right? Whether that has been by erasure, colonization. And so I love that you used the term, and I would love to hear more of Abiquiú as a continuous community. For me, I thought that was super powerful.
I wanted to touch on that as well with a question for Isabel about Abiquiú. That, I mean, it's about Abiquiú itself, but it also, I think, it could apply to different communities, in New Mexico and Southern Colorado as additionally. But the issue of recognition, you brought up that that document signed by Taft more than a century ago, which is just fascinating and jarring almost. Is official recognition something that a community should strive for, or is that not necessary? I know that there are different opinions on this. How do you see that?
Right. It's a point of discussion in the community right now. It's a land grant, Merced del Pueblo. And so in the original bylaws for the Merced del Pueblo, there's care taken in the language for generations to grow and remain and continue for many, many years ahead in advance. Those are the original bylaws. In Los Leyes de los Indios also, there's protection from encroachment. And so what we're feeling today is a wildfire of influx. And that's where I talk about change needing to be guided. And so, we need to see that and protect and not be over-influenced, because that's what got Genízaros to where they're at today. If they were thrown out of the pueblos for being too Hispanic, when they were in the boarding schools, though, they were not, there was other youth that were being put out of the boarding schools because they were too Mexican, yet the youth from Abiquiú were not put out for that reason. So they're in the middle of a changing world, and that I think still continues today if you're not careful. So in the leadership in the Merced del Pueblo board, in whatever comes about in the future, there's some discussion about a Pueblo council maybe, because not everybody has a permit, a land grant permit, and can speak. And so maybe a Pueblo council would represent those that live around in the area but are not a land grant member. So there's divisions too, like women not having permits and things like that.
It strikes me that
I also wanted to ask, and perhaps this is a question for Ana, but some of this history is really quite brutal. People were warring with each other, and they were kidnapping family members, often young children, and there was a lot of trauma associated with this, and perhaps some of it was absorbed or just ignored for a long time, or maybe some of that trauma is still lingering in some places. What about for people who are descendants, for people who are progeny? What about the mental health aspects of that Genízaro past?
Yeah, I found that a very positive correlation with knowing who you are and your mental health. Very positive, of course. Well, that was my hypothesis in the beginning, but I know it's true because people told me that is true. Because of who they are, they know who they are, and particularly this group in Abiquiú. If I'm not mistaken, this is the only land grant that was given to Genízaros in the whole state. Am I correct?
No, actually, there was other land grants given.
Okay, I thought this was the only one.
Abiquiú was the first.
Abiquiú was the first, so
Land grant given to Genízaros in 1754.
So that the fact that that's their land, that keeps them. It gives them an identity too. They're land-based peoples and water-based peoples. So that in itself, they see nature as a healer. They see nature as a church, quote unquote. They go out to the forest. One girl was 18 years old, and I interviewed her. She said, when everything happens and the world's going to end, or the store is closed, I'm just going to walk up into my mountains and find medicine. I know exactly where to go. And I thought that was profound. She was only 18 years old.
And if I could just add a moment of context from the moment is, working at Northern New Mexico College, when we were all being sent home that day, like March 13th, whatever it was, for COVID, and being told that we were being sent home indefinitely, I had some students that I stayed worried about, in terms of them having what they needed. And I asked a student, and she was from Cuestado, and I said, does your family have everything that they need? Is there anything I can do to help you guys prep? And she was like, well, if we run out of food, we'll just go fishing, or, we'll go hunting. And there was this very strong sense of resilience, of self-determination, of, we got this, right? We'll definitely be okay. And so I just went into the COVID recovery. I went into the COVID moment, right, when we were sheltering in place, with that really strong sense that this young woman left me with, that we'll be okay here in the north there.
Yeah, I think that this group, more Genízaros than this, but they live in three worlds. That's an advantage. If you live in the world of Spanish, you live in the world of Native, you live in the modern world that we're living now, the neo-colonization, you have an advantage of being in three worlds. So I wrote a lot about that in my results chapter. about how they live in three worlds. Do you think that's an advantage, Isabel, to people to have those three worlds in your?
Very much so. It talks to me about the initial Genízaros who were the trail guides and who were the ones who held the mixed language and allowed for the trade fairs. I mean, because you have that, you have that participation and so we've been told that we're very welcoming in Abiquiú, and that can be a good thing because there's a lot to benefit. But yes, actually, yes.
Yeah, people came from a lot of different pueblos to Abiquiú, huh? To live, and were welcomed, and they stayed.
Not just the pueblos, yeah. We had lots of people moving in, and still to
it
this
was almost a type of refuge. Yeah, I mean, Isabel, I love your comment about people go to Abiquiú and they visit. They go there for Georgia O'Keeffe, and she was magnificent, of course, but they're missing out on something which is so special, to have endured through the centuries, and it's still alive today. What could be done to really bring that home, perhaps, and to maybe to for those folks who are passing through who know nothing about the history or the culture, maybe to introduce them to.
Well, we've trained docents in the library, and so we have ongoing history workshops or projects, classes, and in that is a lot of language, and so we offer history tours, but also we've developed a marketing co-op because the contemporary world is along the highway, as we call it, but the native traditional art is within the pueblo where people maybe can benefit from the O'Keeffe visitors, right there at home with their native art. And so we try to highlight that through the marketing co-op.
And I would also recommend the forthcoming monograph by part of our comadrasca. Our friend Dr. Patricia Marroquin-Norby has a forthcoming book called Water, Blood, and Bones. And she specifically has a chapter that critiques like the colonizing gaze of Georgia O'Keeffe, but also the continued gaze of the Georgia O'Keeffe Foundation onto Abiquiú, in the many ways that they have, really not been open to having a relationship with the people of the pueblo, but rather want to have that authorial relationship about defining what the pueblo is from that gaze.
Oh my gosh, you just given me a story idea to write about in the New York Times. That's oh my gosh. Thank you so much. I think we need to wrap up this portion, but this has just been wonderful. I really appreciate the discussion and where it's taken us. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Ana. I've learned so much today, and I think that we've just scratched the surface, really. And I'm saying this as someone who's done work all throughout the Americas. I've been into the Andes and into the Amazon and into deep Mexico and the Caribbean, and coming back home has just been an incredible experience for me, and a reminder of just what a special place we're from, and what and just the different cultures, really multiple cultures that were forged in this place, and how they've remained alive, really, which is something truly remarkable, because this might sound crazy, but there are many parts of Latin America where a place like Abiquiú or similar villages have not endured. Have faced really a lot of different challenges, and to have this whole history, just be re-examined and invigorated through new scholarship, new activism, just new the endurance of daily practices, I think is really something that is so remarkable. So I want to thank all of you. I want to thank the Smithsonian as well for this opportunity to just to discuss this subject, and I wish you all the very best. Thank you so much. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Simón. Thank you.
Bueno.